We're going to go game by game, matchup by matchup, and identify the must starts, the sneaky starts, the sleepers. Pretty much, we're going to talk ball in general on these games, going over the game scripts to get a good idea of what these games could be doing, and then looking at these players to see how they could impact our fantasy football lineups. And we're going to split the series up during the holiday weekend. Today, we're covering the Saturday games. Tomorrow, we'll do the Sunday games. And then we'll do the Monday games for Christmas Day. So today we're going over the Saturday slate, which has 2 games. But we're going a lot deeper into those 2 games, considering there's only a few players to cover. That being said, you need to click that subscribe button right now. Click it with the mouse on your computer. Click it with your finger on your phone. Whatever you need to do. Because we cover the matchups every single week, and you're going to need that next year. I'm a key resource for your research next year as well. So I'm going to help you with your drafts. I'm going to help you setting your lineups. That's what this video does. It throws the ideas out there, and you guys are smart enough to take what you need from it and run with it, because I'm going to drop a lot of information today on these matchups. Click that button, stop missing out, and let's look into our first game on the slate. Bengals at the Steelers. 38 over under. Vegas is saying this might be a lower scoring game. I look at this matchup, I can kind of agree. We got quarterback issues. We got Chase out. Very interesting matchup here. It's a divisional matchup. I could also see, because I'm playing devil's advocate, that's my job here, so it's not being wishy-washy. I can also see where this breaks, because this is a divisional matchup. Both teams have assets on both sides of the ball where they can break things loose. And the quarterback play is sus. However, Browning's been doing all right. And the Steelers, they can do some things with these assets that they have on offense. Vegas is playing right down the middle. It's on the upper limit of a lower scoring output here from what they got implied, if that makes sense. We're getting a lot of games in the 30s. 38 is low. 45-ish is moderate. And highs 50, 55 range, even higher. But we don't see that too often. Bengals at the Steelers. I think this one's going to be a conundrum. I think this is going to be a good water cooler game. When you go back to work, you guys are going to be talking about this matchup with Linda in the break room. However, I think this one could break, but I also think it's going to be ugly. I think it's going to be one of those games where there's going to be some action one way or the other, but it may not lend to fantasy football. We're just going to have to see. So I really did not give an answer there, but looking at the Bengals defense here, they're allowing 20.9 PPR fantasy points per game to running backs, which ranks 16th in the NFL. That's throughout the season. They've allowed 4 20-point PPR performances to running backs: Christian McCaffrey, Devin Singletary, Derrick Henry, Ty Chandler. Ty Chandler, obviously, being the most recent. You can score on the upside with them, but they can also be locked down. When they were more locked down, it was more earlier in the season. Teams are starting to sneak away a little bit, but you can really chip away too and get an alright amount of fantasy points against these guys. In the passing game, they're allowing 34.5 PPR points per game to wide receivers. That ranks 15th in the NFL. However, over the last 3 weeks, they're allowing 38.5 PPR points per game, and that's 19.5% above the league average. So we're starting to leak out fantasy points here in the short term. Earlier in the season, they were pretty tight allowing fantasy points to wide receivers. That has not been the case lately, so that's something to look into. They could be allowing output here, and that's due to game scripts too. That's also due to quarterback play. That's also due to the offense as well, because of just time with possession and everything else. That being said, Diontae Johnson looks like he could eat in this matchup. Against Arizona, 13 fantasy points in Week 13. Against New England, 14.7 in Week 14. Against Indy in Week 15, 16.2. He's getting the target share. He's getting the air yards. Enough to be productive there in the air yard department from 100 to 75 range over like the last 5 games. He's shown a steady trend line here of production, which is looking good, which is something you want to see with your wide receivers. This is a good matchup for them. A middle-of-the-road pass defense here when it comes to allowing fantasy points to wide receivers. Quarterback play, of course, is sus. However, you got to roll with what you got to roll with. At least you know you're going to get a guy getting over a 20% target share and seeing about 70 to maybe like 85 to 100 air yards a game. So that's solid there. That's something you can look at. At least you know the work rate's going to be there. That being said, George Pickens, highly volatile. Highly volatile. He's volatile on the low end. He can be volatile on the high end. That's just part of his game. If the deep ball goes his way, he could be okay. He could be okay. That just depends on what happens in the game script. He's getting a fair amount of air yards. He's getting a fair amount of targets per game. Should be firing a little bit more, but it's not happening. This game could present some upside, but it could be a nasty one too. George Pickens is a scary proposition this week. That is my take on that. He's a scary proposition because you know you'd be too scared to not start him, but you're also too scared to start him type deal because he has the upside in his game. We've seen that in his portfolio. The targets on average here, you look from like week 8 to week 15, they've kind of dipped too a little bit. That's something you want to look at. That's with Diontae Johnson being healthy. He's seeing a lot of targets. You're not really trusting the Steelers, but you kind of have a feeling that you can get something out of them, and really depends on how deep you are at the wide receiver position. And then when you look at the running backs here, it's kind of a pick 'em and pick your poison, and you just look at the scoring output from like week 11 and 12 on forward with Jalen Warren and Najee Harris. Najee Harris has been practicing. Looks like he's been good to go. If you had to pick between the two, you know Warren's the healthiest. He's been productive recently with 11 fantasy points against the Colts. Whatever you think about that, he's been used more in the passing game. But honestly, with both these guys in the fold, it's a pick 'em from week to week. And there's a lot of weeks where neither of them is a player you want. But you got to do what you got to do at the running back position here. And if you got to pick one, you got to pick one. But looking at the Steelers defense, when we're looking at the Bengals offense, they're allowing 22.6 PPR fantasy points per game to running backs, ranks 13th in the NFL. 20-point performances that they've allowed. Christian McCaffrey, Jerome Ford, Travis Etienne, James Conner, Ezekiel Elliott being very recent here. And the thing about this is they're allowing a lot of upside here. That's a good thing to see. That means your running backs against them have a good opportunity going nuclear because we've seen that multiple instances. That's a high clip compared to a lot of other NFL defenses when allowing high-end fantasy points to running backs. A lot of other teams that are around this range, they're up there in this range, not because they're allowing 20-point performances, but they're allowing like 15 to 20, and they're allowing that on a more often of the cycle here. I look for that given some opportunity for Joe Mixon. Looking at this down here for the wide receivers, 32.3 points per game to the wide receivers, rank 18th among NFL teams right now. And the last 3 weeks, they're allowing 18 PPR fantasy points per game to wide receivers, and that's 44.2% below average. So they're either locking things down, or the offense, the time of possession, things are slowing up a bit here due to the quarterback issues, and we're just seeing things lock up here. And the cycle is something you want to pay attention to. The big thing you want to pay attention to is Jamar Chase being out. That's going to impact the offense. That could impact it in a major way. Tee Higgins, when Chase is out, since 2021, 18.77 PPR fantasy points per game. Scored 22 fantasy points last week. He has the upside. He also has downside to his game as well, especially when we look at the quarterback position. We look at the game flow here. It could be slower as well. That being said, a lot of people are starting Tee Higgins, and a lot of people are just starting him at will because, one, he's a good player, plus he has the fantasy football draft capital behind him to have that sunk cost in there to make people want to start him. He's a good player. He's been productive recently as of last week. A lot of people are starting him, and a lot of people are not benching him because Chase is out. So really, there's not much question there, but the question here goes with Tyler Boyd. And a lot of people are going to talk him up as a must-get off the waiver wire. And I mentioned him in the waiver wire video a few days ago that he's very promising when either Chase or Higgins is out. And he is. He is. But there's also a downside effect because there are also games where he just doesn't hit. He's more of a roller coaster player than he is a sure thing. And the numbers dipped this year when Boyd was out. He's averaging 12.42 PPR fantasy points per game when Higgins is out, and just 8 PPR fantasy points per game when Chase is out. And I'll have them both there because it's a small sample, and I think relatively it's situational. The thing about this, it adds to the spectrum here. It gives you more of a sample. He has those games where he does go nuclear when one of these wide receivers are out, but he also has those games where he gives you a 5 spot. I feel like he's an up and down play. I feel like he's a gamble. He's a good gamble if you want to shoot for upside, but he's also a good gamble if you want to strike out. That's how I look at it this week. Start him if you want. That's on you. He's an upside volatile play in this matchup. You're starting Joe Mixon. You're firing him up. He's getting the touches. He's getting the opportunities. he's been scoring fantasy production. Looks like it should be close to the same. His last dud week was against Pittsburgh, and now we're at Pittsburgh this week. May want to take note of that, but when you look at the opportunities, he's getting them. And against Pittsburgh, he only saw 10 opportunities in that matchup. He's been getting more opportunities as of late, even with him sharing the rock with Chase Brown. Chase Brown's an upside play. He's a guy that you just sneak in there, but he's not a guy that's not really recommended for lineups, but he's more of an upside lottery ticket. If you want to go YOLO with that, go ahead. You got to shoot your shot somewhere. But Joe Mixon, you're starting him. I don't think anybody's benching him this week anyways. But we're looking at the Bills at the Chargers here. 44 over-under with a thick spread. Bills should be killing in this matchup. They should be going heavy. They should be riding high. That being said, the Bills' defense are allowing 22.2 PPR fantasy points per game to running backs. Ranks 14th in the NFL. 20-point performances from running backs. Devin Achane, Travis Etienne, Javonte Williams. And then allowing points to wide receivers. 31.2 points per game. Ranks 24th in the NFL. Last 3 games, though, 29.6 PPR fantasy points per game, 8.2 below the league average. So again, we're tightening up a little bit, but I don't think any of this matters. I just don't think any of this matters. One, Keenan Allen's out. Look at the running back touches here. Is Austin Ekeler dead? Is he ever going to get right? Is he going to come back on us? Odds are no, but there's a chance he catches some balls and surprises us and gets right. Looks like they're trying to see what's up with Isaiah Spiller. That's what we're seeing from last week. That game script was weird. They were down big. You don't usually get down this big, and usually when you're down that big and odds are against you, you start playing around. That's usually how that works. You start playing around, see what you got on the back end of your depth chart. Austin Ekeler might be getting more opportunities in this matchup, especially earlier in the game. That being said, we just got to pay attention, see what happens. Are you feeling good about starting? I don't think nobody is. Now looking at the wide receivers, we got Joshua Palmer here, catching 4 balls for 113 yards and 4 targets. Remember, Keenan Allen's out. So Joshua Palmer looks like the lead dog in this offense. Looks like he could be getting some opportunities here, but are you going to trust it with the quarterback play? Are you going to put that on your fantasy matchup in the playoffs? I don't want to. I don't want to do that. Some of you guys have to, though. Austin Ekeler saw 6 targets. That is a good feeling when you're looking at him being dust. That might allow him to see targets this coming week, and he might lend into some more productivity. Quentin Johnston, 3 targets. Things are just getting messy and ugly. That's why I'm going over the game logs here, because this team's ugly, and if I pick out or choose certain players, that might not be the greatest thing to do, considering some people don't watch the videos. They come and look for the pictures, and they'd be like, oh yeah, Joshua Palmer must start. I'm going to put him in there. Joshua Palmer's pretty iffy, but he's going to be getting the targets. He's going to be getting upside. He got some air yards in this matchup as well. Again, you're not trusting it. Nobody is. But if you have to, you have to. And you got to play the game how it's played. Chargers defense, though. This is pretty juicy. 25.1 PPR points per game to running backs. Ranks 5th in the NFL. Only 2 running backs scored 20-plus PPR fantasy points on them. Josh Jacobs and Jahmyr Gibbs. And that's because they spread the fantasy points around. Teams usually score, or running backs usually score, the top running back, about 15 or so fantasy points per game. Sometimes 19, sometimes 13, but about on average. And that's a guess on the average in my head. And then you're looking at to wide receivers, 39.5 PPR fantasy points per game to wide receivers. Ranks 3rd in the NFL. Last 3 weeks, 39.2 PPR points per game, 2% above the league average. And we're seeing a decrease here because the game scripts are slower and they're not as good. We're not pushing the ball downfield. Herbert's out. It's impacting this. We could be seeing a little bit slower game with Herbert out. This could impact fantasy production, but I think the Bills are just going to rally. I think they're going to crush. I don't think it's going to matter too much. It might mean the difference between them scoring like James Cook or somebody scoring 20 fantasy points instead of 30. It might mean that. It might impact that. But at the end of the day, I think these Bills are going to crush like Stefon Diggs. I think he's going to get a get-right game here. I think he's going to be getting the targets. I think he's going to be scoring fantasy points at will. And you're not benching Stefon Diggs, even though he has been in the red recently. Gabe Davis, just look at this chart here. He's an upside flyer. You're not starting him to start him. You start him to go YOLO. You're hurting at wide receiver. He's there. You're looking at him in good matchups. He goes off. You're looking at him in bad matchups. Look, Jets, Cowboys, Chiefs, Bengals aren't an optimal matchup. Patriots, but you look at them in good matchups. Pass funnel defense, Tampa Bay, Philly, Jacksonville, Miami, fast-paced game, Raiders. This is a pass funnel game where it's not really a pass funnel game, but they leak everywhere. You could see him going off here. Is that a recommended start? You're never going to recommend Gabe Davis, but we do see a trend in the numbers here. We see a trend here where he scores in optimal matchups, where he's able to get behind the defense and bring in the deep ball. He's an air yards guy. He's a deep ball city guy. He's a Will Fuller type wide receiver, and he's one of those wide receivers who's just up and down. It's off and on. You do not know when it's really going to happen. We do have a trend here, and if you want to gamble on those trends, that's on you, but those are the numbers, and that's what it's saying. James Cook, he's been eating. An RB1 in his last 4 games. And he's probably going to be an RB1 this week. Matchup saying that. Bills are up. He's going to be getting workload. And he's going to be getting opportunities. He's using the passing game. They're using him a lot between tackles. I think Bills are easy starts this week. Whether or not they hit, it's a different story. Whether or not that happens, it's a different story. But they're easy starts this week. I'm definitely firing Bills players up, seeing what happens. But I want to tell you guys Merry Christmas. Let's look at the Santa Claus here jerking off real quick because he's pretty funny. Bam. And then I hope you guys have a good holiday. I'm going to have another must-start video, sneaky start video tomorrow with all the matchups from Sunday's games, and then another one for the Christmas games as well. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Stop missing out so you don't miss those videos as well. Also, we're getting ready to go deep in the NFL draft for Dynasty. We're also going deep in high school recruiting because people like that stuff, and that stuff's fun. I love that stuff, but I'm learning more and more about these recruits, and it's just a building block in fantasy football for me because it allows me to identify these young players, and I identify them in the college level, and then that allows me to identify them when they come out for the draft, and then in training camp, preseason, I can identify them even more, and then I can find breakouts and everything else. Plus, I love sharing the information that I find. But I want to thank you for watching. You guys have a great Christmas, and I'll catch you on the next video.